So how do we reconcile all this with this talk about religion and the founders' views on religion, that they're not antagonistic to it, with this notion of the famous Jeffersonian separation of church and state, right, the wall? Keep in mind three things you know. One is that the founding fathers are not antagonistic to religion. They see it as useful. Right? We can't speak to their personal convictions because they're on a spectrum, but they see of utility to religion in the Republican government. The second thing to remember is that Jefferson had nothing to do with the creation of the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. Right? He's not even part of the story. He's over in France eating cheese and drinking wine and chasing Sally Hemings. Right? And the third thing is that the phrase separation of church and state or wall of separation appears nowhere in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or the Federalist Papers. So where does that phrase come from? And to understand the origin of that phrase, we have to look at one of the nastiest elections we've ever had, which is not this one, right, but the one of 1800. And you think this election was bad, 1800 was really bad. It's really the first competitive election we had. We got Jefferson versus Adams. And the Jeffersonians are going after Adams. They're saying that he's basically a monarchist in disguise. His loyalty is the King of England. He's trying to undo the American Revolution. He has plans to marry his daughter off to a prince of Europe. Right? He's a monarchist. And they even float some stories that he's actually a cross-dressing old woman in disguise. That's true, right? No, I'm not making that up. The Federalists are tagging Jefferson on the fact that he is an atheist. That's the story they're going to put forward. Well, he's an atheist. Why is he an atheist? Well, he's an atheist because he puts all this language out there about science and reason, right? Part of the Enlightenment. He sided with the Jacobins during the French Revolution. When the Jacobins went through Paris and France, tearing down all the churches and all the iconography, and even erected a shrine to the statue of reason, right, that they could worship. And because of this weird Jeffersonian Bible. I mean, there's a bad campaign line to say, hey, this guy actually cuts up pieces of the Bible, right, and edits his own Bible. And they're floating the story that if Jefferson is elected, you better hide your Bibles because he'll have them confiscated. Right? That's kind of a nasty election. So when the election turnout is done, Jefferson sweeps heavily in the South, the green areas, which is all the Democratic-Republican Party. And in the North is dominated by the Federalist Party. But there's a little pocket of support for Jefferson in the state of Connecticut. Right? It's a heavily Federalist state. It's also a heavily Congregationalist state. But there's a little pocket of resistance there, a few people who voted for Jefferson, and these are some Baptists who live there. And as the minority part of that state, they feel persecuted. Now, the reason the Baptists always feel persecuted is because they don't ascribe to any sort of doctrine, any sort of formal state-established religion. The very nature of baptism is that of being a Baptist is that your faith is between you and God and not through the established church. And the big rift between them and like the Calvinists comes from this idea, who are largely the Congregationalists. Right? So the Congregationalists in New England, who are largely Calvinist, make the argument that the people who are saved have been predetermined by God, and the people who are going to burn or who are condemned have been predetermined by God, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. And that theology influences a lot of the deistic views, sometimes a lot of the founding fathers as well. The Baptists believe, remember, that salvation is a choice you make by asking to be saved. You make a decision and you're saved. So you can see why they're diametrically opposed. Right? So these Baptists, feeling a little bit oppressed and out in a particular minority in Connecticut, write to Thomas Jefferson when he wins the election, and they kind of ask for help. Now, it's a long letter, but I want to give you the full text here so you can see what's going on. So they send the letter to the president. Our sentiments are uniformly on the side of religious liberty. That religion is at all times and places a matter between God and individuals. That's the Baptist view, right? That no man ought to suffer in name, person, or effects on account of his religious opinions. And here's the issue. But, sir, our constitution of government is not specific. And they mean the Constitution of Connecticut, right, the state constitution. Our ancient charter, together with the law made coincident therewith, were adopted as the basis of our government at the time of our revolution. And such had been our laws and usages, and such still are. That religion is considered as the first object of legislation. That is, that the government can regulate religion. And therefore, what religious privileges we enjoy as a minor part of the state, we enjoy as favors granted and not as inalienable rights. That is, the government could come in any minute and take away our religious freedoms. Right? Sir, we are sensible that the President of the United States is not the national legislator, and also sensible that the national government cannot destroy the laws of each state. But our hopes are strong that the sentiments of our beloved President, and this is where they lay it on thick, right, which have had such a genial effect already, like the radiant beams of the sun, will shine and prevail through all these states and all the world till hierarchy and tyranny be destroyed from the face of the earth. So they're looking for a sympathetic person. Help us secure religious liberty here in the states. And so Jefferson writes them back. And this is probably the most famous letters in our discussion of religious liberty. Right? And so here's the yellow part is the important part. Believing with you, Jefferson says to the Baptist, that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence the act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature, meaning the U.S. Congress, right, the legislature of the whole American people, should make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And here's the famous phrase, thus building the wall of separation between church and state. And that's where that famous phrase comes from. So note a couple things from the letter. One is that Jefferson is not antagonistic toward religion here, right? He gives us a lot of this idea that religion is important, it's between you and God. He even signs off in the letter offering a little prayer of blessing for the Baptists there. So he's not antagonistic toward it. But what's more important is that Jefferson says, it is not the duty of the national government to play any role in religion. So he's sort of taking a political stance here, and he's saying to the Baptists, I feel your pain, and the national government will have nothing can do nothing to infringe on your religious liberty. And really address their problems at the state level, but this is how he's responding. And there's a third point here in the italicized paragraph, which is missing from the final draft. And the reason we know these are here is that when the founders often wrote letters, they kept what they call a copybook of all their correspondence, because when months would pass between letters, and you got a response back that said, referencing your letter of August 3rd, that might have been a month ago. You're like, what did I write August 3rd? So you could go back and look. And Jefferson even had a little machine that he would write all his correspondence out, and it would keep duplicate copies. And the point basically says that Congress thus inhibited from acts respecting religion, and the executive authorized only to execute their acts, I have refrained from presenting even occasional performances of devotion. And why that's important is he's getting some pressure as the president to do religious proclamations like days of Thanksgiving and days of national prayer, which both of his predecessors, Washington and Adams, did. But Jefferson refuses to do so, even though he did them when he was governor of Virginia. Remember, he's not antagonistic to the idea. But the argument is it's not the place of Congress to meddle in religion, nor the place of the president to make religious proclamations, because the national government should have nothing to do with it. That's the argument he puts forward.